Hi, I'm here today with a new colleague of mine, Clay Cranford, who's out of California. I've invited Clay here today to talk to us about a plethora of topics. In the background there, you can see he's written an amazing book called Parenting in the Digital World. And I just wanted to offer him to our community because he's an expert on all sorts of things, mainly law enforcement, but also, again, parenting in a digital world. So welcome, Clay. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for having me.
Why don't you just give us kind of a scope of the last, 20 plus years of your life, what you've been doing, what your passion is, who you are, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, so I'm number one. I'm a parent. I have two boys. They're one is a junior in high school. One just started college this year. And married. I have almost about 19 years in law enforcement. I'm currently a sergeant in a large agency down here in Southern California. And the majority of my law enforcement career has been working with students and in schools. I was a school resource officer, and I was also a juvenile investigator, and I was on our county's behavioral threat assessment team, which means I would go to schools throughout the county here and investigate threats of violence, whether they were coming from a student, mostly from students, but also from adults, targeting the school or staff at the school. And I think we covered more than 300 schools, and I probably did, conservatively, probably like 200 or so threat assessments where I was like literally sitting across the table from another person and assessing whether this person made a threat, but actually do they pose a threat? And then we also consulted with other law enforcement agencies down here who didn't have a threat assessment team, and kind of helped them out with situations that they were dealing with. And after doing that for a while, I realized that this was a really important model that we had here, and I wanted to see if we could replicate it in other districts and other states. So I kind of took everything that I've learned and put it together in a package where I was going out. I go out throughout the United States and educate um, threat assessment teams, educators, law enforcement, social workers, all the people who are part of that team on how to do a threat assessment, how do you manage that person of concern, and then stepping down from that, we talk to educators about, if you're a teacher in the classroom, what kind of things should you be looking for, what are warning signs, and then I talk to parents about the same thing in their community. So it's really a kind of a whole community um, issue. But we start from from students about what they should be looking for and what should they do with that information, all the way up to the people who actually do the threat assessments.
Well, that sounds like a fantastic journey so far. And thinking about the observable signs of a child that's going to commit violence, I noticed in some of your blogs and articles that you've posted, as well as the courses that you offer, you seem to talk about that first and foremost. And I think for me, as a former teacher and administrator, I continue to see, even in 2021, kids know well before we do
Mhm.
when somebody's off or speaking about violence. So, what are some of those observable signs that a child might commit violence?
Yeah. So whenever I start this discussion, and I know I have parents watching this, I want to let parents know that school is the safest place for your child to be statistically. So I just and I'm a parent too, and I understand the anxiety that we have, and the concern when you're not right there with your child. So I just want to, like, hopefully waylay some fears and anxiety, and just say, hey, your child in their school is by far the safest place, but we still need to be kind of cognizant of the issues. And so that's where obviously we're talking about. So so the first thing is that there's this kind of myth that that these people who commit violence at schools or workplace or wherever, it's kind of the same type of person in terms of their behavior, and it could be a child or adult. But the point is that they don't just snap. So it wasn't like one day they just woke up and they're like, I'm going to do this. This was something intended ahead, or back in time. They've planned it, and it's it's, we call it intended violence or predatory violence. So it wasn't just a quick reaction to something, although that happens. We see that kind of violence all the time in schools, but this is something that's intended and planned. And if that's true, and it is, then that means we can stop it. So that's the good news, folks, is that the good news is that when we have people trained and know what they're looking for, we can actually do something about it. So in fact, the Secret Service did a study and found that they looked at all these people who assassinated or attempt to assassinate public officials over like 30 years, and not one of them just snapped, and not one of them like told their target that they were going to do it. So these are people who very much intend for this to happen. It's planned and it's purposeful. So to kind of give you guys, I think, a good picture of this, I'm going to share this one slide with you. And I think I'm a visual guy. I like seeing things like this. It helps me. So this is just a slide from my class that I from my threat assessment class. So we call this pathway warning behaviors, and it starts, as you see, kind of like this ladder. It starts at the bottom, and as we move towards the attack, obviously it's escalating. And these behaviors, as you move up the rung of the ladder or the steps here, these are escalating behaviors. So just really quick, so all this is stemming from a grievance. There is a perceived grievance that this person has, and we all have grievances, and like that's, I think, natural. But what makes these people different is they can't shed those grievances, get over them, and move on. So they really collect them. They perseverate about them. They're very focused on those things, and it's a very unhealthy kind of preoccupation that they have. And one of the warning signs is that you're seeing, you talk to people and they just keep going back over the thing over and over again, this thing that's happened to them, or their perception that someone's wronged them, or the school wronged them, and it's not something they can get over. So right there, that's maybe a warning sign that someone's really kind of struggling with something, and then we want to be able to intercede as soon as we possibly can on this pathway and give them the help that they need, and then get them off this pathway. I mean, that's the whole point of the threat assessment team and the whole management piece that we do. So the next step is ideation. So they have the grievance, and then now they start really fantasizing about how would they address that grievance. And it's through violence, right? So they start thinking about violence, paying. They're an avenger. They're paying back the people who've wronged them, or maybe the school in general. Maybe it's the principal or teacher. And then in this stage, this fantasy starts kind of like leaking out into their life, and we call it leakage. Is this kind of particular warning behavior? So you might see a student who's writing in a writing assignment talking about violence, or in their artwork, in the things that they're doing on social media. There's a strong thread of violence, and sometimes very extreme violence throughout what they're doing, and then also in their conversations. So when they're chatting with another student, they may throw something out there that's maybe it sounds like a jest or a joke, but it's violent nature, like, hey, someone ought to shoot the principal, or something like that. And when the other student looks at him and says, hey, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh, I'm just joking. And a lot of the tips that we got on the threat assessment team came from something just like this. So a student heard a student kind of talking about it, or maybe saw something they posted on social media. So this is probably the biggest, most obvious sign. And where we can make the biggest headway with this is, and I know we'll talk about it later, but how do we get students who often know about these things way before the parents and educators know about it? How do we get those students to report this information? And then from here, they go to research and planning. So now it's not just kind of a fantasy. Now it's, hey, I'm gonna Google search how to make a bomb, or I'm gonna start doing research on getting Google aerial maps of the school. Like, they're basically now doing some legwork. They're doing some research, and then they go into preparation. So they start gathering materials. They're gathering weapons. If they're going to make a bomb, they start putting that together. They start putting together their costume, right? Because the way you look is really important for them. They want to look like the Avenger. Maybe it's kind of commando type of tactical wear. So they're the way the victims are perceiving them at the time of that attack is really important to them. So they start putting together a costume or their equipment. So on the threat assessment team, when we would get some information like, hey, there's some leakage information here, we'd get permission to maybe search that student's bedroom. We'd go to their home, talk to the parent, and so we're looking for this. We're looking for things that they're collecting in their bedroom, and another thing too is parents. I really encourage you to look at what your child's doing, whether it's online social media for sure, but also like what's going on in their bedroom. And I kind of joke about this in my presentation to parents. I say, when you are searching, cleaning your kid's room, you should be looking for problems. And a lot of these kids who are on this pathway, they're not bad kids. They're just in a severe crisis, and it might be a mental health crisis. And all those threat assessments that I've done, I've had a couple where I had a student who was absolutely, if we hadn't found out about that person and interceded, there would have been violence at that school. And we had a couple of students who looked at us and with, often at this point they're crying or whatever. And they said, thank you for stopping me. In a way they didn't want to go through with it, but they didn't see any other way. And then the last two pieces, breach and attack. So that's, actually approaching the school and the attack. So once we get to those stages of this warning behavior, our ability to intercede and do something is very compromised, I guess. The window to intercede is small. So those are the ones that we share when we educate parents and educators about this, and hopefully give them an idea of what they should be looking for, and then and then how to report it, and then how to and then hopefully there's somebody in that school district or that law enforcement agency that knows how to do a threat assessment.
So you talked a little bit about social media, video games, privacy, cleaning/searching bedrooms. So what I hear often is like, he's 15. I want to give him privacy, both on social media and video gaming and in his bedroom. What would Clay say about that?
I like to give parents the okay to absolutely invade their child's privacy. Like there's no downside to this. And I would tell parents like, hey, thicken your skin a little bit. If you see something, if you're looking at your kid's social media and they and their friends are talking about things that like, maybe using bad language or whatever, just chalk that up to the kid stuff and just move on. But if it's something about violence or drugs or sex or things that you might be concerned, that you should be concerned about, then those are things that we need to step in as parents and provide that parenting and support that our kids need. When we look at the Columbine, the mother of Dylan Klebold, she's wrote a book. The interesting thing about his parents was that one was a child psychologist, the other one was an educator, and she wrote a book about that experience. And actually, she's done a TED Talk worth watching if you haven't. And she desperately wishes she had invaded her child's privacy. She had a sense that there was a problem and he was struggling with friendships and things like that, but she wanted to give him privacy. And if she or her husband just went down into that basement and looked at what was happening, in a heartbeat, they would have known that they needed to get their child help. So I think that a parent, if they want, should be able to stick their nose into any part of their child's life, no matter what. Social media, their bedroom. I think that's absolutely okay, and I think it's appropriate.
So as it relates to that, we've had more, at least in my local regional area, more suicide than violence. However, we have had a suicide on campus with a weapon that was deemed an active shooting incident when the call first went out. And then we had a murder-suicide on the other side of town between two students in the cafeteria with 1,500 kids on campus. So we have in Phoenix experienced this. And what I continue to struggle with is we have these like campaigns, you know, if you see something, say something, and all of these things that, you know, from an adult standpoint seem to line up with like, yeah, if you see something and you see somebody saying something weird, please come report. But I think systemically, it doesn't line up with teen brain. It doesn't line up with, you know, snitches get stitches still, and there's still retaliation. And there's kind of a code, at least in boy world, that like you don't sell another friend out, right? So after some of these incidences, when I've asked kids like, why didn't you report when you knew that he was distressed and suicidal? A couple things pop up. I thought he was kidding. I didn't know it was as bad as it was. And like if I told my parents about him, then my parents wouldn't let me hang out with him anymore. And his friendship was super important to me, and I was supporting him. And lastly, they would have taken my phone. And so they were not willing to give up the friendship or the phone. So how can we be better trusted adults? So when kids come to us with stuff like this, that our automatic reaction isn't, this kid's a bad kid and give me your phone. Because that seems to be either like the overreaction, or then there's the underreaction where kids have said, I reported and nobody did anything about it. And now look, how can we use students as assets?
Yeah, that's key. And I just want to touch on one thing about when you said that you've been dealing with a lot of children hurting themselves. So suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people. So if we're really concerned about violence against our children, we should be really concerned about self-harm and self-violence. And, and that's another reason why parents need to be really kind of circumspect about what their children are doing, especially online, because if a kid is, you know, thinking about hurting themselves, it's they leak that information out, and often it's coming in those conversations. So parents need to be engaged. Now, yeah. So how do we leverage our students so that they share the information that they have? And I think you did a really good job of summarizing the reasons why they're not doing it. And I think. I think one thing that we should be doing is creating systems that our kids feel comfortable using to share information. So, I mean, when I do my presentation to students about internet safety, one of the things I talk about is like, hey, if someone sends you a mean, rude, threatening message, these are the things you should do. And one of them is take a screenshot, tell a trusted adult. And I kind of, as a caveat, I say, look, especially if someone's talking about wanting to hurt themselves or others, this is not a secret you can keep. You have to share it. But of course, you know, we're dealing with teens, and that kind of message is going to bounce off, you know, largely what you've already described. So what we found really helped, number one, is schools who see their students as change agents. So the more that a school engages their students and says, hey, we want you to be part of the solution, and whether that's like kind of anti-bullying programs. I worked with a group called Team Kids, who's down here in South Orange County, and they really are dealing with working in schools with elementary students. But they just go in there and it's a really kind of neat program where it doesn't, you don't have to, it's not just the leadership of the school. Like, it's not just like the same 10 kids doing stuff, but it's actually getting the entire school involved in some kind of philanthropic cause or whatever it is. So the more we can engage students, and so that they feel like they have some power and some agency and they can actually make a difference, I think that's a good first step. The other one is, you know, our students should be able to send a tip in a way that is confidential. So down here, we have a thing called text a tip. And and it's actually free. And if somebody wants to know more about this, they can message me, and I'll give you like how to do it. But basically, using Google Voice, and it's a number unique to that school, and students know that they send a text message to that number, It's going to go to like a school counselor, the school resource officer. So we're kind of like leveraging the thing about social media, which is kids post things on social media and not thinking about the consequences, right? So we're leveraging that by saying, hopefully they're not thinking about the social consequences of quote unquote telling on somebody, right? So it just makes it less personal, and they're willing to do that. So most of the tips that we got at our schools, about weapons on campus, drugs on campus, alcohol on campus, and people thinking about or talking about her came through this text to tip. It's not anonymous because there's actually a phone number attached to that person, and a lot of times I would text them back saying, like someone says, there's a student, there's a guy in my class with a knife who has a knife in his backpack, and that's it. And like they're a kid, so they're not thinking about anything more than that. So I text them back, well, what classroom are you in? Or, who's this person? So we end up figuring out what it is. And then, so we found like that was really helpful, as opposed to some national texting deals where like you go to some call center and then they send it somewhere and it ends up into this black hole of like the FBI or something like that. And it gets lost. So I like things that are very local, school to the people at the school who can actually do something about it. So I think those are two good starts. So, and also training staff and really, one of the things that came out with the Safe School Initiative report that kind of was done after Columbine, one of the big things they saw was that the more pro-social positive relationships that adults at the school have with students, the safer those kids are. And the more likely they are to share with them about things that are going on. So when I was a school resource officer at my middle school, like 1,400 students, I mean, I had relationships with these students. They saw me every day and I would talk to them. And after a while, they're realizing I'm just like, I'm an okay person to talk to. And so building those relationships are really important. I mean, obviously I had a uniform on, so maybe that's difficult for some students, but there's coaches and teachers and administrators of those schools. And if they need to make that a priority, to be somebody that a student feels safe to go to as well.
I think, so ironically today, my student school had a armed gunmen in a nearby neighborhood. So they went into an active lockdown situation. So, again, today is like the anniversary of Columbine 22 years ago. When you look at the protocol for parents, I often hear in my digital wellness seminars, like, well, I have to get my child a phone, even if he's 8 or 9, because what if there's a school shooting? So I remember being on campus and having parents drive to the school during an active lockdown, like a real situation. And so what would be your advisement as to how parents can help in those situations as opposed to not help? I saw on our school's Facebook page, several frustrated parents that why didn't we know about this until after the fact, after we know everyone's safe and it's lifted. And, I just chimed in and said, sometimes we don't have to know all the details. What we know to be true is when we drop our kids off in the morning, what we've said to the administration is, I'm entrusting you with my most precious commodities. So in thinking about phones during lockdowns and or during an active situation, what is your advisement for parents on like how best to help themselves and their anxiety as well as their students?
Yeah. Well, I think schools, without sharing too much about their security protocol, because the school, they have to have a plan. They share that with law enforcement, and the law enforcement and the school should collaborate on, if this were to happen, how are we going to handle it? But the parents should know, at least in that plan, is that we don't want you coming directly to the school ever. If there's a major issue, because there have been situations where that's happened. And, think about like, the avenues into your school, maybe there's 1 or 2 streets. And sometimes schools are nestled inside of residential areas, so there's not a lot of, it's not a big artery there. They'll get packed with cars. Parents will abandon their cars when they go as far as they can, and then they'll run to the school. And now you want to bring in the ambulances, you want to bring in the fire department, and they can't get there. So, so parents going directly to the school is an absolute liability. It's putting your kids and other kids in danger and the staff in danger. So, like, let's never do that. So the parents should know, hey, if there's an issue like you had at your school today, that there should be a phone number that they can go to, that it maybe has a message waiting for them. And and then there will be some other site allocated for the parents to go to get reunited with their kids if necessary, but never at the school like that, unless the whole thing's lifted and then school's back to normal, operation, and then they can come back and pick up their kids. So I've seen it happen both ways. Anyway, kids having phones in the classroom is not increasing their safety with regards to these situations. And in fact, it may be creating more problems than solving. I know parents, and I'm a parent, so want to have the information up front, especially when they hear, through Facebook, there's our school's on lockdown. So the school district, I think, perhaps can do a better job about getting that information out quickly to parents and help them kind of understand what's happening. And I think that'll help. But yeah, I think we've struggled with this, and we've had school districts say, what should we do in this situation? And we've even gone as far as say, well, if your classroom's in a lockdown, we want students looking to that teacher and listening to that teacher and not on their phone. That's really important, because the decisions made in those minutes there, or even seconds, are critical, and we need kids locked on to what's going to happen now, or what do they need to do next. And the phones, I think, are going to get in the way of doing that. Not to mention, if you want your room dark and quiet, you don't want kids on phones either. So there's kind of a combination of things there. But yeah, I think parents need to understand that they have professionals at that school who've trained and know how to manage this situation. And parents, although it's difficult, to be patient and wait to get information.
So I want to know more about your book, and then where people can find you, contact you, have you come do a training for schools or parents. So tell us just a little bit about your book.
Yeah, Parenting the Digital World, first published in 2015. I just came out with the latest edition, which like literally a few weeks ago. So I walk families from A to Z with regards to setting up their child's digital world so that it's safe. There's some real difficult conversations that we need to have with our kids that our parents didn't have with us, that we never had to think about because we didn't grow up in rural social media, that we need to have with our kids. So this will walk you through those conversations, literally give you the words to have those, including things that are like things that you never want to talk about, like how do you talk to a kid about pornography, how do you talk to them about sexting, predators and violence, and all the things that our kids are running into online. And then when I would walk out of my presentations, parents would be like, "Hey, Clay, will you come to my house and turn on these parental controls you're talking about?" And I said, "I would love to do that. I just can't obviously do that for everybody." So the back half of the book, like walks you through step by step how to set up the parental controls on every one of your devices, including Xbox, PlayStation, everything. So I hope in this one book, there's no fluff. It's only what you need to know. Make a huge difference for you and your family. And you can download it as an ebook from my website, cybersafetycop.com. And also, if you're a person who likes to actually hold something in your hands, like a real book, you can get it off of Amazon too. Yeah. And if you're interested in knowing more about what I do at school, so we go and do presentations to students about internet safety, digital safety. We do presentations for parents, and then we also do training for the educators and law enforcement on that, and as well on behavioral threat assessment. So if you're watching this and you're an educator or a school district supervisor, and you're like, "Hey, we don't have a threat assessment team here, we really need one," please go to cybersafetycop.com, shoot me an email, and I can kind of talk to you about how how we can do that.
So cool. Well, thanks so much for being here with us today. It was really informative, and we'll send it out across the airwaves, make it viral. Everybody needs this information. So thanks so much for what you do every day to keep us all safe.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks.